Welcome back, everyone, to another Talk Sox interview for the off season. This time, we are joined by none other than MassLive's Chris Cotillo, which, by the way, are spots still available?
They are available, yeah, tomorrow for the next workshop. So I don't think anybody's going to be claiming those spots because it's late in the game. But if anybody's watching and wants to, buy Chris Cotillo at gmail.com. Nick did it, and look at him, and look how he's turned out. So
Yeah. I do have to admit, if anyone's watching this and they are interested, if not for this one that starts this week because it's kind of late, next time Chris puts one out, I recommend if you're interested in this stuff to take it. I took his level 1 and level 2 workshops as well.
yeah, no, I mean, you're one of the good ones. So glad to join you.
Thank you. But so to kind of talk about the Sox, I know you guys had just put something out maybe about a half an hour ago. So my question is kind of towards the left-handed relievers. Do you feel the Red Sox are confident towards what they have right now as depth towards like Moran and Drohan in the minors, or do you think they're focused more on bringing in a more established veteran arm to help the bullpen as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just one of those markets that hasn't really moved at all. You saw a lot of the high end relievers go off the board pretty quickly, like Edwin Diaz during the winter meetings, and Luke Weaver and some of those guys, Devin Williams before the winter meetings. But the dime a dozen veteran lefties, Justin Wilson, Colomb, CNL Perez, Tim Meza, Suter, all those types of guys are still available. Those are going to be like 1 year, $2 million deals, minor league deals, $3 million deals. So, they have plenty of options. They probably have a ton of minor league deal offers out there, and see if somebody takes one of them. And if they don't, they start offering major league deals. They can obviously get a little bit more aggressive the closer we get to spring training if there's a guy they really want. But I just don't think there's much separation between all of the guys that are out there. There's no like elite, guy they want to target and want to get in the building immediately like a year ago with Wilson. I think he's a fit to return if he does play. He's considering retirement, but just someone to fill that role. And I think they could use right-handed help too, and some of those kind of same mold. To me, the bullpen's a big question mark beyond Whitlock and Chapman, just because you've lost a lot of guys who had big roles last year. Obviously, Bernardino did, Murphy did, and you're going to be stretching out Tolley and Early and some of those guys as starters. So. Yeah, there's work to be done, but I think there's not a lot of big ticket items. Sir Anthony Dominguez is a guy who might make some good money, but the fact he's still out here on January 12th when the rest of the bullpen market has moved is probably a sign that he's not going to get a great deal either.
So obviously, the Sox have some minor league guys. David Sandlin is one who comes to mind. He had been developed as a starter, and last year they had moved him to the bullpen, possibly to be brought up at the end of the season. That experiment didn't work out very well. Do you happen to know if the team's planning on continuing that with him towards the bullpen, or is next year possibly starting back in the rotation for Worcester?
Yeah, I mean, two things on him. Number one, the bullpen thing, for whatever reason, the role adjustment went really haywire, and it was not good. They threw a lot at him to see if he could, make the routine adjustment and potentially contribute down the stretch in a way that really Tolley did and Harrison a little bit. And he was a disaster in Worcester. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a good big league pitcher. It didn't take immediately. I think the default and just the way these organizations, especially the Red Sox, operate is this: if you have a talented arm, you're going to try to make them a starter for as long as humanly possible. Try to then make them a reliever if the need arises later on. So there's room in the Worcester and Boston rotations for not just the Crochets and Grays and Oviedos and Bayos of the world, but also maybe at AAA, you have people like, Drowan, Uberstein, Sandlin, obviously, Early and Tolley and Harrison are going to need spots as well. So I think they're going to bring all those guys to camp as starters. They're going to build them all up to 5-6 innings, get the pitch count up, because it's something you can do is you can decrease pitch count from like 80 to 40, but you can't jump from 30 to 100. So it's easier to kind of pare it down. But what the Red Sox are going to do is try to build out 2 full rotations, obviously one in the big leagues and one in Worcester, of guys that can come up. Because I think in previous years you've seen, a couple years ago, and this was ill-fated for different reasons, obviously, but Matt Dermody was a guy they needed. Now they don't have to go to that type of guy or a Kyle Barraclough to eat innings. They have these all these weapons, and that's even after you've already seen Dobbins, Fitz, and Criswell all leave. So they're in a good spot with that. I expect every single one of those guys, Sandlin included, to be a starter to begin the year. And then, if they need a good high leverage bullpen arm down the stretch to get a big out, we saw Tully do it in the playoffs. I think, guys are going to do that. It's just, how teams operate.
All right. And then you had mentioned Harrison. Do you happen to have any thoughts on right now if he fits like the current pitching staff, or is it likely he might open the season in Worcester, or is that more something that depends on how spring training goes, how everyone is health-wise, the like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, he's a guy that is at a different development point compared to Tully and Early. So therefore, they've developed him a lot over the course of, he's obviously got a lot more major league time because he did pitch, a lot in the majors with the Giants. They have the luxury of putting him wherever they want. I just think, at full strength, it's tough to see any of those guys getting a spot over Cutter or over Patrick Sandoval, two guys who are bona fide major league starters. And, it's a big if those guys will be ready for opening day, considering they're both coming off severe injuries, missing the entirety of last year, in Sandoval's case more. So that's why you have those depth pieces. Harrison is a guy that obviously can compete for the opening day rotation. I think this is the year I'm going to stop doing the opening day roster talk because it changes so much. Like, Sean Newcomb was on the opening day roster. No one would have ever anticipated that. He was here for a month. It was okay, and he's really good with the A's. But, every year there's guys who are on the opening day roster that you never hear from again. Every year it's hard to predict. I mean, last year we wrote all these different things about, Narvaez or Blake Sable as the backup catcher, and look how that turned out, right? So guys emerge different times during the season. Just spring training is extremely boring, so the roster projections usually fill a lot of days along that path.
I mean, it's one thing that's great about baseball, the unpredictability of it.
That's
I don't
right.
think any
spring
I don't
training's
think
boring outside of the Fort Myers Brewery trivia nights, which you are a veteran of as well.
Yeah, that wasn't too bad last year.
No, that's the highlight. It's like when you get an outing out of prison.
But so speaking about unpredictability, now that the whole Bregman Devers saga is concluded, what are kind of your thoughts on the whole thing?
I mean, you can't trade Devers to accommodate a guy who's only going to be with you for 100 and something games. It's just the reality of kind of everything that it just they underestimated how much Devers was going to put up a stink and how upset he'd be about losing his position. And then they underestimated how hard it would be to retain Bregman. And those two things together, those two underestimations came together for a perfect storm that you can't have as a big market team. And the idea of how are Bregman and Devers going to coexist? Well, they don't have to worry about that with zero of the two on the roster now. And I think it's, in a lot of ways, obviously, sad for the Red Sox that it ended up this way. But in a lot of ways, they have no one to blame but themselves. I think better communication with Devers from the start would have obviously been, something that would have helped everybody. I think Devers could have handled it well. I've been talking about that for 7 months, about how both sides are to blame there. With the Bregman thing, I don't really fault Alex Bregman at all in how that, transpired. He signed a deal that, you can call it a 3-year deal all you want when it was signed, and effectively it's a 1. And everybody knew that. Everybody knew he was more likely than not to opt out after the year. Nothing happened to change that at all. And, here we are at a point where he obviously opted out, and, he's now gone. And I think, based on what Carabas has said and some of these other kind of pieces that have kind of leaked out over the last 24 hours, it seemed like, the Red Sox probably could have found a way to make it work. It's on them that they ultimately didn't, which is kind of the way it works in a lot of cases. And I think it's not always so you can be in the camp like I am that I wouldn't have given Devers the deal that Bregman, the deal that he ended up getting yesterday, even with the deferrals. I think it's an overpay, and it might not age well in Chicago or whatever. You can be in the camp of that while also acknowledging there was probably a pathway to get something done earlier. And there was with Bogarts 2 years ago. There probably was at a certain point with Mookie, though I have my significant doubts about that because I think he has a lot of revisionist history when he talks about it. I think there was with Bregman. You're telling me that if you sat him down and wanted to do 5 for 150 on July 15th, he wouldn't have taken it? I don't know. You just, when you expose yourself to a bidding war and you introduce factors that you have no control over, a motivated team like the Cubs or a motivated Padres team 3 years ago with Xander, you're exposing yourself to risk and you're exposing yourself to the unknown. And they keep, no matter who the regime is, no matter who's in charge, they keep screwing that up and they keep losing these bidding wars. And for that, there's nobody to blame but them. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah. I mean, with, like you said, the information that's been coming out these past 24 hours, I believe it was AJ Przinsky this afternoon on Foul Territory, I want to say, talked about it a little bit, which from how he talked about it, it seemed like the Red Sox weren't believing Bregman when he said like there was a better market for him out there than what the Sox originally believed. With their final offer of the 5 years, $165 million, do you think if they included a no trade clause, he would have turned down the extra $10 million from Chicago? Or do you think after how the talks went the whole offseason, that wouldn't have made much of a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I based on kind of the tea leaves from Przinsky, I'm not sure if that's coming from Bregman exactly or whoever, and obviously some of the stuff Jared, who talks to, Bregman, has said. I think clearly there was a point where Bregman in the offseason said, I'm not going to give the Red Sox the benefit of the doubt. That was something that became clear to him at some point during the winter. I'm not sure exactly when or why. Obviously, it was something to do with how the negotiations were going, and at a certain point, he just probably said, "Screw it." I never took him to be someone who'd take a hometown discount anyway. He just, nothing about him suggests that he's that type of person, and I'm not saying he should be. So I think it was a combination of the factors. Like, if the Red Sox were at 175 and their deferral schedule was better than the Cubs and they wouldn't do the no trade clause, maybe he says, all right, it's easy enough, let's do it. But there are three factors working against them: the $2 million difference a year and the overall value. The no trade clause, I think, is probably third, but I think the deferral schedule and structure is something that is a real big factor here. And I'm not a CPA. I don't think you are, so we're not going to get into the specific numbers on present day value and all that stuff. But I do think when you're having those payments out till whenever they were in a couple decades, it hurts the overall value of it. And if he's going to get more money quicker with Chicago, I mean, every single person you've ever met, Nick, would take that deal. And so I don't blame him for that. And so, again, on the Red Sox for not recognizing that threat was there, that somebody was going to do something like that, and not, reading the market correctly, which, again, they've been struggling to do for years.
All right. And likewise, about reports this afternoon, Bradford, he reported that the team might instead be pivoting towards more of a run prevention, towards pitching and a lesser bat, but defense focused. Do you think that might be the direction the Red Sox head in, or do you think they're still looking to possibly add a bat through like either a trade or a free agent signing?
Yep, both things in play. I think they're going to stay engaged on Bichette, Eugenio Suarez to a lesser extent. They're going to be in on the trade talks for, whether it be Brendan Donovan or Paredes, some of the guys they've been talking about, since before the winter meetings, just because they have to stay engaged on those types of things. At the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if it got to a point where, they found the prices to be prohibitive on a lot of those things. I mean, there's a lot of teams that could use position players, and it seems like between Bellinger, Tucker, and Bichette, those guys are going to find big market homes, whether in Philly, Toronto, one of the New York teams. With the pitching, I think it could be a way to maybe audible and find a way to spend a little less money on a similarly talented impact player and just make your pitching staff really good. I think they're in a place now where they didn't get their top choice in Bregman, and they have to be open to pivots, open to creativity. And I think there are a lot of guys on that free agent market, if they do go in that direction, that you might be able to get on a more palatable deal, just because Valdez and Suarez and Gallen, not to mention Giolito and Bassett and some of these guys, are still out there with a month to go. I just don't think the free agent starting market is as strong as those pitchers would have hoped, and maybe you can get a more palatable deal that way.
So do you think after last year, where the Sox almost seemed to be a little hesitant to sign Bregman because of the qualifying offer until Pivetta signed with San Diego, do you think they'd be willing to sign a pitcher who had declined a qualifying offer, like Suarez or even Gallen?
I mean, there's going to be no perfect situation. I think they're going to be hesitant, and obviously they don't get a pick for Bregman leaving because Bregman was only eligible to get that once, and so they don't get a pick for him. They're not going to get a pick for Giolito because they didn't give him the qualifying offer. So, I that's a factor, and it's you got to weigh those things of like, okay, here's the trade package we're giving up for player A, but here's the free agent dollars plus pick package we're giving up for player B. I don't think that the timing of the Pivetta and the Bregman deals last year, I think, made it kind of seem like these things were more linked than they were. I think they were going to get Bregman at that deal no matter what, assuming that Pivetta was going to leave because they weren't going to re-sign him. So it's always a factor. I don't think it should be. I think those picks are wildly overrated and, kind of overdone by teams, but they value them highly, and that's really all that matters.
All right. So just kind of one or two more questions, but for Paredes of the Astros, obviously, he could be a potential fit for the Red Sox. He could play third base for them. He's got some power, and with the green monster in left field, he could take advantage of that. Do you think it would cost a decent size of, let me rephrase that. Do you think it would be a big package of prospects, or do you think it would be something closer along the lines of what they gave up for like Sonny Gray or Wilson Contreras, which, yes, they were big, but it wasn't like a very top 5 prospect?
Yeah, I mean, I think something for the Contreras package, makes a lot of sense. I forget, is Paredes controllable? I'll look this up real fast. He's controllable for 2 more years, just like Contreras was. Another run-producing bat, had a pretty good year last year. Obviously would play, third for you. I think that's a guy that fits. But at the same time, do you want to keep, diving into that group? Do you keep wanting to, basically torpedo parts of your farm system when you have the money to spend? And that's the issue is there's no perfect fit in terms of just handing over dollars at this point. And that's what Bregman was. And I think that's kind of the unfortunate part of, what's transpired the last 48 hours or so.
All right. And then just kind of the last question was, although it's not officially stated, it seemed like the entire offseason, Bregman was plan A with how other deals worked out with other teams. They missed out on Alonso. They missed out on Schwarber, who, in my opinion, was never going to leave Philly anyway.
Yeah.
Along those lines, because in a sense they were waiting for Bregman's decision. Does it almost feel like now that they missed out on Bregman, it's similar to the trade deadline where they were so focused on Joe Ryan that they didn't really have time to work out other starting pitcher deals, and so they had to fall back on Dustin May?
Yeah, I mean, the issue with that is when the Joe Ryan thing fell apart, they had 4 minutes left, and they have 4 weeks and a lot more options. So that's the beauty of the offseason. And they have more than 4 weeks. I mean, we all leave for spring training 4 weeks from today, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a move after you get there, as we've seen with obviously JD Martinez and Trevor Story and Alex Bregman. They love those Fort Myers big press conferences. So I think, we'll continue to see them pushing and trying to make moves. Obviously, the market hasn't moved. In some cases, it has. In others, maybe Bregman will kind of catalyze it. I think that they're going to try to continue to stay disciplined and be in their process, and that's hurt them so far. So they need to get aggressive, get uncomfortable. Obviously, they pulled off the deals they have. They got to keep going because the roster is incomplete and it's not functional right now. I don't think that's arguable.
Yeah, all right. And just to end it again, everyone who's watching, if you're interested in taking Chris Cotillo's workshop, I recommend it. It's a great time. You learn a lot. If you don't believe me, there are quite a few people online who have taken it as well. And you can even ask Chris himself. Trust me, it's worth it.
Thank you. That's the best advertisement I could possibly get. So, yeah, spots do remain.
All right. Thank you again.
Thanks, man.
Yep.